All right, we may be expecting a few latecomers, but it's 4:30, so I will call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. First question is recognizing alternates. Do we have any?
I don't see it. Well, Charlie Eastham is here for Ruthina Malone.
Okay,
And then Janice Weiner had asked to attend the meeting virtually, so we were able to accommodate that request. We're not able to see her, but she can hear us and we'll be able to hear her.
great. The second item is considering approval of the meeting minutes.
Move approval.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. The next item is the setting the next board meeting date, which is listed as July 13th. And when I spoke with Kent yesterday, he mentioned that it would be moving to Coralville. That's the plan. So we will be rotating out to Coralville in July. The next item is public discussion of any item not on the agenda. Does anyone have any items they would like to discuss? Okay.
I'll mention, John, that I'm filling in for Kent today. He had an emergency. Luckily, most of the items on the agenda are routine, though.
All right. Good. All right. The administration, Emily will be speaking on the update to the Mpojc public participation plan revision process.
Thanks, John. A public participation plan is a document designed to formalize the public input process used by MPOs in their planning processes. Each major planning document developed by the Mpojc has specific requirements for public input, which do vary depending on the governing body that requires the work. Mpojc last updated a public participation plan in 2017, and federal guidelines recommend that the plan be updated every 5 years. The current plan, which is attached to the memo, is consistent with federal and state regulations and stipulates minimum requirements for providing residents and stakeholders with reasonable opportunity for input. The plan formalizes the planning policies used by Mpojc and encourages public participation and communication with member entities. As required by the adopted plan, a 45-day notice for public input will be published regarding the revision process. And as part of this update, we would like you all to please review the plan and provide any comments or suggestions you may have for us. We intend to present the revised plan to you all at your July meeting for approval. I will add that we did not make any significant changes to the attached document. We changed names, dates, but nothing of substance. The requirements and length of notices are all the same. Like many agencies, as Ken has mentioned in the past, we do struggle a bit with public input, but we have been trying to reach out in various ways through social media. We've been trying to hold more Zoom public input meetings, just some lunch and learns. So we're trying to reach out, but if you have any recommendations, suggestions for us, please let us know.
Anyone have any thoughts or comments?
I did have a couple. Emily, you just mentioned social media outreach, which isn't reflected as something that's, I mean, obviously you could do more than is in the plan, but I didn't know if that was worth kind of codifying into the plan as far as in addition to just the Mpojc website.
Yeah, that's something we certainly can consider and see how that would fit in. Like any, I guess, social media, things are always changing, so we
Right.
would just want to make sure that it's general to include, you know, things like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, so that in the event that something goes away, which, you know, I don't anticipate that happening soon, that we were able to communicate with the public.
I was looking at the getting the word out section, and I noticed that with regard to, say, Planning and Zoning Commission. You know, we have the Johnson County Planning and Zoning Commission, but not the Iowa City Planning and Zoning Commission, or the Coralville Planning and Zoning Commission. And, you know, I was trying to think about what commissions might particularly, you know, likely have an interest in transportation planning. And it does seem to me planning and zoning would be a potential audience or interest group who could be incorporated into the outreach in terms of getting the word out.
Certainly. And that list that is shown in the document is the list of those agencies that have reached out to us. And they've indicated they would like to be notified of any happenings related to the MPO. So, you know, we certainly can reach out to groups that are across communities like planning and zoning
Yeah.
and see if they would like to be
Just in terms of
notified.
consistency.
Sure.
But I do think they seem categorically to be a group that would be interested. Another was the Climate Action Commission. You know, land use transportation is a big piece of our climate action plan, and I would imagine some of the commissioners would be interested in, you know, like our long-range plan that we're seeing today.
Sure. Yeah, we can reach out to those entities and see if they would like to be added.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering about the, now that the new self-sustaining municipal improvement district has been passed on the southeast side of town, if that's an opportunity for outreach somehow.
Yeah, we can look into
I don't know exactly
it.
what they'll be doing in terms of bringing people together, but I'm sure there'll be some efforts to bring people together around that. It might be an opportunity to dovetail.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We'll look into that.
Emily, as additions to this list, you mentioned orgs can reach out and ask to be added. Are there any parameters or limitations, or it's just this is your blast distribution list?
This is our blast, yeah.
Okay. And is there, I noticed that publication in the Press Citizen is one of the kind of specific items for notice. Does the Mpojc also do press releases that has like a media distribution list?
We do send press releases. I can't tell you off the top of my head if we target particular media companies, associations, but we do have a list that we send out along with any typical publication. Would you like that to be more specific?
I mean, again, I know we can always do more than what's
Sure.
listed here, but I think sort of a general trying to hit
Sure.
more than just the Press
Sure.
Citizen, especially with how local media has changed in the last few
Sure.
years.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the Gazette, and I know many people in Iowa City read the Gazette. They may or may not read the Press Citizen. You know, it's just two papers locally that have some overlapping distribution, but they're both important.
Definitely.
I wonder too, Emily, as an alternate from the school district to this meeting, I haven't actually read the entire packet before the meeting, but parts of it that I skimmed do mention school-related transportation issues, especially ability to get to the school by bicycle or some other alternative. And I don't know if, since the district, I think, is not actually a member of the Mpojc, maybe I have that wrong, I'm not sure. If it's possible to include notifications to the district staff about planning issues that relate to transportation to local school buildings.
Yeah, we can certainly try to identify those staff that would be interested in that information and get the information sent out as it relates.
And the district, as you probably know, anticipates building more buildings over the next few years too. So.
Yes, yep. I'll add that to our list.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thanks. We move on to transportation planning. Consider approval of the draft fiscal year 2023-2026 Mpojc Transportation Improvement Program projects.
Thanks, John. The Annual Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, is our local programming document for federal and state surface transportation and transit projects. The significance of the document is that all MPO-funded projects must be programmed in the TIP in order to receive funding. Project pages from the draft 23 to 26 TIP are attached for your review. In 2021, the board awarded $7.38 million in STBG funds to 4 projects to be programmed in the fiscal year 25 to 26 timeframe. The projects programmed in FY25 included Iowa City's Taft Avenue Reconstruction Project, Coralville's Highway 6 and Deer Creek Road Improvement Project, and University Heights Sunset Street Pavement Repair and Pedestrian Improvement Project. North Liberty's Ranshaw Way Reconstruction Project was to be programmed for FY26 and is now included in this year's TIP. And then the board also awarded $520,000 in TAP funding to Iowa City's Highway 6 Trail Extension Project to also be programmed in FY26. So these 2 additional projects are included in the TIP. They were not included in last year's TIP because that ran from FY22 to 25. This spring, the board voted to program approximately $60,000 in that surface transportation block grant funding to participate in the DOT's pavement data collection program, and they also voted to opt out of the federal aid swap. These actions, again, are also reflected in the TIP draft. The draft also includes Federal Transit Administration projects and the program 5307 operating funds apportioned by the board in January for FY22. And then the projects from the MPO Transit Program of Projects, which was approved by the board in April. Tonight, we are asking for approval of the draft TIP list of projects. The Transportation Technical Advisory Committee recommended approval of this at their May 17th meeting. And upon approval, we will start our 30-day public comment period and submit the TIP to our public input organization mailing list, the Iowa DOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Upon review by these stakeholders, we will then present a final TIP for board approval in July. And then the final TIP is due July 15th. So if there are any comments or questions tonight, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions for Emily? Okay,
All
I entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Was that an opposed from Janice? Or an aye for in favor of?
Nope, I just was late.
Okay. Thank you, Janice. Motion passes. The next item under transportation planning is consider a resolution approving the Mpojc fiscal year 2023 transportation planning work program.
Thank you. Attached is a draft copy of the Mpojc FY23 Transportation Planning Work Program for your review. The work program includes all locally requested projects we receive from member entities and general projects and procedures as required by the Iowa DOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Besides being a federal requirement, we rely on this work program to organize our data collection and manage our project workflow throughout the year. We will continue to take requests for additional projects throughout the year and complete those projects as time permits. At their May 17th meeting, the Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the work program, and tonight we are asking the board to consider approval of the FY23 Transportation Work Program. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. You had all approved the list of projects at your last meeting, and since then, Coralville added one project, project number 21, which is an always stop analysis at Holiday Road and South Ridge Drive. Otherwise, this is just the entire planning document along with those projects, that list of projects.
Any questions for Emily? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion passes. The third item under transportation planning is consider a resolution approving the Mpojc 2050 travel demand model and long-range transportation plan.
Thank you. So after a multi-year planning process, I am pleased to announce that our MPO long-range transportation plan and travel demand model out to 2050 are now complete. The plan is an update to the previous 2045 transportation plan and is the vision for transportation across the metro. The emphasis does remain on the 9 guiding principles with also an expanded set of performance measures that we will use to assess how the transportation network is performing into the future. Amid our emerging technologies such as automated and connected vehicles, we feel as though the plan does continue with an emphasis on equity and enhancing quality of life. The plan also helps guide decision-making over the next 5 years in terms of project selection and funding opportunities. Since your last meeting, we sent the draft plan to the Iowa DOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration for final review and comment. The document was also published for a 30-day public comment period, and that ended on May 2nd. We received positive feedback both from residents and from DOT staff. And finally, I want to thank this board for your involvement, for helping us work through the guiding principles, adjusting the scoring criteria for prioritizing projects, and then also just reviewing draft content. The Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the long-range transportation plan and the travel demand model at the May 17th meeting, and tonight we are asking you all to consider approval of the long-range transportation plan and travel demand model. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those. The plan is due to those 3 entities, the DOT, Federal Highway, and Federal Transit on May 31st.
Any questions?
Emily, what was the scope of the public comment that you received?
So we received a couple emails, and then we had a survey link on the LRTP page, and we had a few comments on there.
All positive, it sounds like?
Yes.
Good.
Yep. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would move adoption of the proposed resolution approving the Mpojc 2050 travel demand model and long-range transportation plan.
Thank you.
Second?
Thank you. And discussion?
Thank you to staff and everyone else who put in a lot of work on this.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We enjoyed most of it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful document and it's just packed with information. I kind of wish I could unpack it in a way to, be able to comment on it thoughtfully. Those on council know that I'm concerned about traffic safety, and I looked at the data there, and they certainly could improve, as well as climate-related data in terms of vehicle miles traveled per capita. So I view this as sort of a document that is kind of laying it out there, and as an MPO, and asking our municipalities, to carefully consider our policies moving forward so that we can better align with our climate action goals related to traffic safety, better use of our bicycle networks and increased pedestrian travel. Try to move away a little bit from our car-centric culture. So it's all there, the information's there. And, it'll really, in my view, be up to the municipalities to take action as we all see appropriate to improve the situation. But, it's in good shape, I think. It's a good document, and things could be worse than they are. So I think we have a lot to be thankful for. I do kind of wonder about the population projections, which are kind of a linear analysis. And just knowing how uncertain everything is right now, I don't know how you make predictions about population. It just seems the volatility of things could throw our projections out the window, especially the further out you go. But we look at it every 5 years, so there's always an opportunity to adjust the plan as we move forward.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention, is that we will review this, start planning the next document in 3 years. So if we need to make adjustments as to the population projection method, we certainly can do so at that time.
All right, good. Any other comments? I'd entertain a motion.
I think we already.
Did we already do that? We did, okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, the item D under transportation planning is the update on the Krandick rail discussions.
At our April meeting, we briefly discussed the merits of passenger rail and the opportunity to study bus rapid transit in the Krandick corridor. The discussion of bus transit stemmed in part from new information that, one, the Krandick Rail was no longer interested in operating a passenger rail service. Secondly, the idea that bus transit could be an easier and potentially more cost-effective service to implement. And lastly, excitement around the 4 new electric buses that Iowa City has. To gauge interest in using bus transit as an alternative to passenger rail, Kent had met with several area city managers and contacted Krandick Rail. While bus transit was not something that has been previously discussed, both groups were very open to the potential. Kent was also in communication with the Surface Transportation Board, which is the federal agency charged with economic regulation of rail lines, to discuss the 2 potential mechanisms to implement bus service in the corridor. And those 2 are listed in the memo. The first is that entities cannot rail bank exclusively for bus use, as the legislation is primarily intended for rails to trails conversions. And so while we can't do that, we could potentially rail bank if a multi-use trail and a bus line did run parallel to each other. The definition of rail banking is in your memo for your information. The second is that the bus-only option would need to be accomplished through the rail abandonment process. So this is option 2. Rail abandonment is the process permitted under federal law to discontinue the use of the rail line. However, part of the process allows other interested rail companies to come in and have the first right to purchase the rail line for their use. As previously directed by the policy board, Kent does intend to continue to have conversations with city managers and elected officials to maintain the momentum. And as he's identified in the memo, next steps include gauging interest to hire a consultant to study the feasibility of implementing bus rapid transit as an alternative to passenger rail, or moving forward with forming a working group, hiring a design consultant, and then pursuing grant funding to implement a passenger rail service. As Kent was unable to attend the meeting, I will try my best to answer the questions that you all may have. And John had met with Kent yesterday too, so John, feel free to add in anything as you see fit.
Okay. So, discussion of this particular item, what do you all think?
Any sense of what the Krandick wanted to do?
They are open to a trail, bus rapid transit or passenger rail. You know, they can't make any assurances as to moving in one direction or the other, but they are open to studying those and moving forward with that.
Do you, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you see any companies interested in purchasing the rail?
I can't answer that. I don't, in conversations with Ken, it's unknown.
Okay.
It's likely that someone would come in, but, you know, it's just, it's unknown. Yeah.
Your turn, Chris.
And I'll go back to your first question. Or maybe you can answer it, and I know that you may not, so that's okay. Can you put a finer point on what Randy would be willing to do? You mentioned like 3 things there. Can you paint a picture of what those may look like for us? You mentioned trails, and can you just be a little bit more specific?
So I can be as specific as I know. So I know that Crandic had basically written a letter to inform city managers that they would be able to support a trail by itself, bus rapid transit by itself, or passenger rail. Now, they can't make any assurances, as I said, as to for sure being able to implement that and move forward with one or the other. It's just that they've worked with the communities and they're willing to continue that partnership.
Okay, so if you're talking about trail or bus, are you talking about, and maybe this is the part you can't answer, are they talking about removing the rails on there or leaving them in there and having a trail bus service work like on top of them? Being parallel to them doesn't seem like a real viable option in certain places. There's not enough right of way to happen.
Correct. There's not enough right of way for certain things to exist together.
Right.
So that would be determined.
Okay.
And I spoke with our city manager about this, and he was referring to the letter, so I can just kind of say at least what was related to me, Chris, that might help fill that in a little. But I think the sort of intention of the rails to trails transition, that the rail banking federal mechanism is therefore, I think, does anticipate taking out the rail.
Okay.
And the rail, in this case, Crandic, would remain the owner and would have an option to re-implement rail in the future. My understanding, and Emily, you may know better, is that it's very unusual, if not never, that they have done that. You know, rail operators have taken back a rail that's been made into a trail. But I think the option referenced here, I do think, unless I misunderstood, that Crandic said maybe a trail adjacent to a bus, you know, kind of running both on the right of way would be an option.
Correct. Yeah, a trail with a bus taking the tracks out would be an option.
Okay.
Just one individual, but I continue to feel like the most important thing is just protecting the right of way. Because I think once it's gone, it's definitely gone. And, you know, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this is, you know, this was the route many years ago. And if we were going to design a route right now, it would be pretty close to exactly where it is. And we just may not have the demand today or the money today or whatever, but it just seems like if we let it go, then we're really doing a future group wrong, because maybe in 20 years this is viable, or 50 years it's viable, but if we do away with the right-of-way, then it's not going to happen.
Where do you see the potential for doing away with right of way right now?
Well, I
How
mean,
would that happen?
by just sort of, I guess I would say, I guess I would vote to keep the rails. Maybe I should say that.
Okay.
Just because I think, I don't know, buses probably, there's already roads that they can take, you know, if we want to do buses. But this seems like a pretty unique feature that if we get rid of it, then it's gone. You know? So but I totally get the fact that nobody really has this budgeted.
Yeah.
So,
I think a lot of the rail would have to be replaced.
yeah.
So preserving that physical space is, I think, the primary thing and stuff. I guess, you know, I don't know if the Grandic really has that in their future plan to use anything with it, you know, and if they flexible on what we want to do. I understanding that correctly?
To a certain extent, rail abandonment, there's only so much right of way there, so that's a constraint. If they do abandon it, then, we may not have the option because another railroad would come in, so there's always that hiccup.
I'm not sure what they would do with it if the Crandic's not, so that.
Yeah.
So, but if they rail banked it, we could put a trail on it, and as long as the Crandic was willing to maintain that relationship, if it's rail bank, can they then sell it to somebody else?
I mean, I think that whatever agreement Crandic and the communities would come to, it would be, for 100 years, this trail would exist, or, whatever that timeline is, and that could be determined.
I wonder, maybe trying to get a hold of the Crandic and the organizations, the entities here, an agreement of what we can do with it, that we can nail down quicker, and then we're not going to lose that, that flexibility in the future, whether it's, train stuff, bus stuff, even a trail. I mean, be a great trail. So.
And I think what we learned over the last, 6 months or so, as Kent talked with Crandic, was that they, I don't know, 2 years ago maybe, were saying they might want to operate passenger rail on that line, and then last fall said, no, we don't want to operate it, but you can go ahead and figure something else out. So that's kind of how I understand where we're at now. And I think with the abandonment process, the issue would be, would another operator come in that wouldn't, they'd be using it for freight and wouldn't allow any other potential passenger uses. I think from a long-range, planning perspective, the key, regardless of, rail or bus or whatever the mode is, the key is that we're looking at ways to put people in the corridor and move them north and south, not on 965 Ranshaw Way, not on Interstate 380, in a way that is safe and, environmentally sound and accessible and easy. And I think regardless of the timeline, that's something we really should not step away from. So I think, whether it's a working group to talk about the possibility, what would bus rapid transit with a trail immediately adjacent to it, like, to me, that's a really exciting possibility, where you would get the pedestrian and bicycle access as well as maybe passenger at the same time. And I think that would be a great thing to just keep talking about. Think about what's possible.
I agree with you, Laura, and I think the first thing we need to know is how much spaces we have on there. And if this study for gauging interest in a consultant, if that consultant is like, to your point, Rod, preserving that space in there, whether it's for rail lines or for bus and trail, and then at the same time knowing whether Crandic is going to be okay with any of those moves. I feel like we should probably have more solid information from Crandic first before we commit to having somebody look at it, because if Crandic says, you know what, I said 3 options back in May of 2022, but really we would only be good with one of them, then that wouldn't be good for anybody. So if we could get better commitment from Crandic in what guardrails would they want up there? We need to stay in these lanes for them, and then have a consultant take a look at that. Because if we're going to put a trail on a bus line there, I don't think it's going to fit in certain places, and it might. Maybe I'm not. There's a very good chance I'm not creative enough to see it that way. But we need to then have that consultant help us to understand that. And I don't think that'll be a tremendous expense. I don't think it'll be this type of study that we've seen over the last couple of years.
So Chris, for your information, Crandic did send a letter to the city managers that Laura was referencing, indicating that they're in support of studying this further. They're in support of, us trying to figure out what may work the best. So what are you looking for in terms of a more defined commitment?
I got the impression, and I must be wrong here, that maybe Crandic said they were in support of the study, but at the same time they didn't say, yeah, we're good with it, go with it. But maybe that's implied, and maybe I misread that.
I don't know if it's implied because they haven't made any assurances. So I guess the information we have is the 3 studies, and that's kind of it in terms of how things will work for the passenger rail
Okay.
and the trail. There's no defined or concrete information as to bus rapid transit. There hasn't been a study done on that.
Right.
I personally think the preserving the corridor is important. I think the viability of the bus rapid transit, especially now with the option of the electric buses, really enhances that option because it provides a much cleaner, smoother ride than would a conventional bus. I think it would help distinguish it from our street systems as a means of travel. It would have the same kind of cachet as a light rail system in some ways. And the hybrid concept of pedestrian bicycle bus is very intriguing. So it could enhance our recreational networks as well as provide another means of getting north and south. I wonder too about what the land use potential is along the corridor. I'm not familiar with the entire corridor, but I drive through to the research center up there, on the Oakdale campus, and I think, my God, this could be potentially a really charming small town, perhaps, depending on how it was developed, as well as all that office park, which I'm kind of concerned about the future of office parks these days. So if that land, whether it remains or not, seems to have considerable value that would be enhanced with better access, which this corridor runs right through it. So it seems certainly worth looking at further in my mind in terms of what the potentials are and what, give us a better sense of what direction to choose. So do we have a sense of the, moving, at least continuing the conversation? Does anyone have reservations about that, or is opposed to proceeding with further discussion?
Can, oh,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
It looked like there were a couple of options here. It wasn't necessarily on one, so I don't know how to answer your question, John.
I was just going to say that Kent can continue those conversations with the city managers, and if you all want to have conversations with your city managers, and we can go from there.
One other question I had, Emily, was the DOT provided some, voiced their strong support for passenger rail along that corridor at our meeting back in November. Do you know if Kent's talked with them about how different modes might impact their ability to support the project like that?
I do not know that, no.
Could you
But
pass along a
yes.
request that he asked them?
Yes, I will.
We had a gentleman talk about on-off ramps where people would be able to be, to get on and off, park, all that. I don't remember who that gentleman was, but he sounded like he had done quite a study at one time.
That may have been Brad Newman, who retired from the MPO. He may have,
Probably.
talked about the studies.
Okay.
It'd be interesting, just maybe have, I don't know if you have access to just an engineer person and just say, hey, if I wanted to put a bus on this, what would I have to do? Because if they say, oh, you just take the rails out and put blacktop or pave over it, that, gives you some information. So the other thing about a bus is it's scalable more rapidly. So if you spend a lot of money on rail and then anybody riding it, now you've spent a lot of money on rail cars. But if you buy a couple buses and don't many people ride it, I'm sure we can find some place to put them. Or a lot of people ride it. It's much easier, I bet, to get a bus than it is a passenger rail car.
Yeah, it seems to me the next increment, you know, that in terms of where we are now, to consider the BRT, particularly with electric buses, to me that's the next increment. The rail seems like a little bit of a leap for you know, from our current transportation systems, and you're kind of describing how, you know, the bus in a way is more flexible depending on, you know, how well things go, with less investment up front.
Okay.
Okay.
Quick question on the study. So for bus transit, buses are quite heavy. So the standard is usually 6 to 10 inches of concrete. That's what we do on institutional roads on campus. The stop and go, obviously a little bit heavier than a longer route like highways and things like this. So BRT, the expectation is that they will continue to travel, not have that stop and start. Keep in mind all of the stops. I guess, would the study also contemplate the authority who would manage the BRT between all of our the universities and the communities that it goes through? Because I know that was kind of one of the elements of the Krandic study, as well as the idea and the physical things. I think you're right. I think a cost would be very low. Knock it out. How much would it cost physically? But the bigger question to me, when we wanted a BRT, is who's going to manage it and how would that work? And I think the university is supportive of everything until we probably get to that level, if that makes any sense. So I just want to keep that in mind, that if we're looking for a study, how big and what are we going to look at? But it would be a lot of concrete to make that ready for a bus. And depending, this is the downtown to North Liberty, right? Not the Cedar Rapids. That's what we're talking about. So, yeah.
Well, Kent will circle back with the city managers, work through some of these details, and then we can bring it back to you all at the July meeting. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to him if there's anything, you know, that comes up between now and then.
Thanks, Emily.
Of course.
Okay, good. Is there any other business?
I did have one thing real briefly. For all the partners here, this is not really MPO business, but this is a great opportunity for me to share it. Some of you may have been around, there was a July 21st, 2021 joint entities meeting where we talked about an aquifer study that the county did 16 years ago with the USGS, and it's just about expired. And we had been engaging the USGS to talk about doing another. Obviously, with all the development in the area, you know, people need to know that there's enough water and where it is. The USGS was excited to do that. They talked to us, what, John, about a month ago, maybe?
Yeah.
And presented a proposal where they will study the aquifer. They actually want to do something big enough that it would take in all of Johnson County, most of Lynn, most of Cedar. It's basically the whole aquifer itself. So it's a pretty big area. Parts of Washington, Benton, Iowa County are all in there. The USGS was also willing to, the cost of this study is about $450,000. If we did it in the current it's a 4-year study, and then they would present the results, which is actually perfect timing for us because that's when the other one basically would be done. Over that 4 years, it would be $450,000. If we acted now, they would pay $150,000 of that. Oh, thanks, John. So this morning, the board gave authorization to our Planning, Development, Sustainability Director to go ahead and enter into a contract with them. I think we'll vote on that tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Vote on that tomorrow to go ahead and do it. We really wanted to take advantage of that, you know, 1/3 match coming from the federal government. The problem is, well, some of you were at that meeting back in July and shook your heads, yes, we don't have any agreements. So we are going to be reaching out to all of you university, every municipality. Because it's a bigger study, we'll be talking to Lynn County and the city of Cedar Rapids and basically every city that's in this web and asking them to participate in some way to offset that cost a little bit. We've already made the commitment, we're doing it, but we certainly don't want to go it alone. So you'll be getting some kind of official letter at some point relatively soon, just asking you to consider joining us as a partner in this endeavor, and so we hope that you'll consider doing that. And we obviously don't have any method necessarily figured out yet of exactly how to ask what the appropriate amounts are per municipality or anything like that. We'll try to figure that out, and we'd be open to your suggestions. So that's it.
Thanks, Ron. Any other business? Okay, if not, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Janice. Thanks, everybody.
Sure.